Welcome on into the Utah Blockcast. I'm Steve Bartle, Utah Insider for KSL Sports. Going to be back with you on a Wednesday. Quick reminder before we dive into everything here. Please go like and subscribe to the podcast feeds. Submit those 5-star ratings. If you want to watch on YouTube, go to the KSL Sports YouTube page and you can find the playlist of the Utah Blockcast videos there. And that would be great. Usually we have a lot of visuals on these videos with post games and stuff like that. We also go live, and that is where we go live, is on YouTube. So that's where to go if you want to start watching the podcast, which is a lot of me talking. But again, I typically have some visuals and things, highlights and stuff. Thanks to working for KSL, we usually have video of the game and unique highlights and all of that. So anyways, again, please go like and subscribe to the podcast feed, submit those 5-star ratings, subscribe to the YouTube channel. It goes a long way to help me out and to help grow the podcast here. Want to remind everybody again, on Thursday, we'll be doing our live stream episode at 8 p.m. So we'll be going live on YouTube to preview the Arizona State game. That's the episode where we dive into the matchup and the specifics of each matchup. And, we also get the viewers involved and feature comments throughout the stream. It's been a fun way to interact with listeners and supporters of the Utah Blockcast. So again, we'll be going live tomorrow, Thursday, October 9th, 8 p.m. We usually do that every week. Thursday, 8 p.m. we go live and just have a good conversation, a good time on that episode. Now, for this episode, I welcome on Damon Allred of ArizonaSports.com to provide some insights on the Arizona State Sun Devils. This is the third edition of the Ingham Bowl with Coach Whittingham and Coach Kenny Dillingham in a rather pivotal matchup in the Big 12. I appreciate Damon for hopping on, providing some insights. We talked for about 20 minutes. Didn't get it into everything Arizona State, but I think we got into a couple of really important topics there with him. But first, I've got some questions that I want to run through really quickly. Our friends on Blue Sky have consistently been tuning in, supporting, asking for fee, asking for engagement on over there. So want to make sure that we show love to the folks on Blue Sky and other social media feeds as well. So going to continue doing that. Probably be digging for question on threads on Facebook here soon as well. So want to make sure that we get everybody involved. But I've got a few questions here to run through. And so the first one is from DJ Lova. What do you think Morgan is going to do to help Nate Tillman be ready for these next few weeks, as the team will probably target him? And I think, that is a key point, that given the matchup with Arizona State, BYU, Colorado, and Cincinnati, those are all teams that are very capable through the air and through the passing game. Also pretty balanced. Well, at least, three of those teams are pretty balanced, run pass. And so that's, for Tillman being a true freshman, these next 4 games are going to be pretty tough. These are going to be genuine tests. And, I think with Tillman needing to step up against West Virginia, it's important to keep in mind that not only did Utah lose Nate Ritchie in that game, but also Jackson Benny. And I think that's something to keep in mind when we're talking about Nate Tillman potentially needing to step up as a starter. I think Benny will also factor into the situation here at safety. But with regards to Tillman specifically, he had a pretty productive game against the Mountaineers. Obviously, some mistakes, specifically in coverage, some blown coverages. And I think the bye week, came at a good time for him specifically, and Morgan, to, go back, watch film, really dive into the film, and, develop an understanding of what happened, what went wrong, and what needs to be corrected. And when it comes to Utah, when it comes to Scally especially, he's a coach that always preaches and emphasizes the fundamentals. So when we're asking, what is Scally going to do to help Tillman in terms of doing something special? I don't think Morgan is the type to do um, special things for players. He's just going to harp on the fundamentals. He's going to harp on, being assignment sound, being fundamentally sound, because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, right? It's about these guys getting to the point where they understand their assignments, their fundamentals, their technique, to the point where they're just out there reacting. And I think that is what Coach Scally focuses on as a coach, is just developing the fundamentals, the basics, to get to the point where these guys are just out there reacting to the action. And so I think that's going to be the approach that I think Scally takes with Tillman, is just really harping on the basics, the fundamentals, to help raise his level of play. You don't want to create special schemes or special assignments for a player that forces others to overcompensate and that sort of thing. They all have their 111th. And I think that's what Scally preaches. You hear it all the time from the players, is just doing their 111th. And I think that's the mindset that Scally is going to take with Tillman, is just making sure that he understands his assignments, understands his duties, his jobs, his responsibilities. And I think that's going to be the focus for Scally and Tillman specifically, more than anything else. So, it's just about raising his floor, his understanding of the playbook, of assignments, and all of that. And I think that's going to be key for Tillman moving forward. Next question. This one from Here's Johnny. He asks, in a follow-up to the previous question, he asked, do we have more depth at corner or safety? Should Morgan consider moving Benny over to safety and play more Caldwell, Saunders, I should say, and Cotton at corner? And I think we've I kind of mentioned it there, in the previous answer, but I do think Jackson Benny will factor into things at safety. Keep in mind that, he's been with the program now. This is his second year. He spent all last year with the safety room. He spent spring ball, operating as a safety. They didn't move him to nickel into this two-way role until fall camp. So I think there's a lot of familiarity with the position already for Benny. I think he makes the most sense to kind of, take on a lot of that responsibility, if not most of it. But at the very least, sharing those responsibilities with Tillman, I think is going to be at the bare minimum we see for Benny. Now, something that Coach Whittingham talked about in the press conference on Monday is, he mentioned Jeremiah Caldwell, potentially moving inside as well. And I think that is something that Utah should also explore, not only just in and of itself, but also in combination with, moving Benny to safety a little bit more. I think Utah needs to have a couple guys, make that move to safety. And I think when you look at cornerback, keep in mind, you still have Scooby, you still have Snowden, you've got Blake Cotton. Those are primarily your starters, your ones. You still have J.C. Hart, who the staff is really excited about. He got some opportunity against West Virginia, made a mistake, but learned through it. And you see the size, you see the athleticism that they love. And I think, developing him, getting him up to speed is going to be important. And then Donovan Saunders, he was in that battle with Blake Cotton. I think Utah can rely a little bit more on their depth here at cornerback to kind of help alleviate some of the depth concerns that have now come up with this safety position after losing Rabbit and Nate. So I think it makes a lot of sense for Utah at the very least to move Benny to safety, to make that his primary role on defense. But then also exploring the potential of Jeremiah Caldwell making that move to free safety. I talked about it on the previous episode, on Tuesday's episode, breaking down sort of Whittingham's comments about the situation. But I think Caldwell, given his background and experience at Garden City Community College, he played safety there. So there's familiarity with the position there as well. And I think that's going to be important for Utah to look into as well. Next question. This one from Doge. What are your thoughts on Wayshawn Parker's usage so far? I'm worried he isn't getting enough touches with how elite he could be, and could see him hitting the portal. I think we're making a leap there, Doge. Not to call you out, but let's talk about this, right? Wayshawn Parker, I think, came to Utah, and expectations have been high for him, right? He put it out there. He wanted to run for 1,000 yards, 1,500 yards, even, and the reason for that being Devontae Booker being a great running back here and their connection at Grand Union at Grant High School out there in Sacramento. And I think there's a lot of motivation for Parker to be productive here. He's said his fair bit on the old Twitter machine, and I think given the amount of work he's been given, it's been a little surprising and obviously disappointing, concerning, to your point, Doge. And I think watching this running back room, I think watching it, I think we all kind of agree it would be great to see Wayshawn Parker get a few more touches per game. I think 8.5 carries is really surprising in terms of what we've seen from him and from the rushing attack. But it's not that they're not getting production from other carries either. So let's keep that in mind. And then with Wayshawn in particular, so he's shown that he can be explosive, and for me, that's the big reason why I think he should be getting more touches. Is he offers a little bit more explosive potential to rip off those big plays, the 30, 40-yard runs, the 50-yard receptions, those types of plays that we've seen from him this season. I think he offers that a little bit more, and I want to get him more touches. But I don't think we're to the point just yet where we need to start concerning ourselves with him leaving because he's not getting enough touches. Based on what he did last year at Washington State and what he's doing right now with Utah, let's keep this in mind, right? Through 5 games, he's averaging 6.7 yards per carry and 15.1 yards per reception. He has 3 touchdowns on the ground and 2 touchdowns through the air, through the passing game. So he's already matched his touchdown total from last season and is currently averaging 5 more total yards per game on 2 fewer touches per game compared to last season. So, I think the concern about limited touches is valid. I think he does deserve a higher volume of reps. I think he's shown enough where, and I've talked about this before on the podcast, is getting more juice from the squeeze that the offensive line is providing with their blocking up front. I think Utah does need to get a little bit more juice out of the run game, and I think Wayshawn offers that, like I said. But that's not to discredit anything that N'Kerry Rogers is doing. He's been super productive as well. But I think Wayshawn offers a little bit more potential. But the idea that, he is, upset or frustrated, I think is making a mountain out of a molehill here. Utah's staff, I think, clearly values him as a versatile weapon. Wayshawn himself has talked about, being bought into this 1-2 combo with Rodgers. And I think come November, there's going to be a lot of tread on those tires with Wayshawn. So I think, through 5 games, he's already ahead of pace in terms of what he did last year at Washington State. And I think there's a lot of potential given his usage and a lot of tread still being on the tires. I think as we get into the deeper parts of the season, that's going to really benefit Wayshawn moving forward. So I think let's pump the brakes on any sort of, talk about him being frustrated or anything like that. Let's pump the brakes there. He is still productive. He's outpacing what he did last year, especially on the, in terms of the touchdown count. He's on a great pace. So I think, but I agree. Wayshawn should be seeing a few more touches per game. I would say get him to 15 touches, get N'Kerry Rogers 10 touches, and then let's incorporate Daniel Bray with 5 or so touches per game. I think that's the ideal split in my mind. And then the last question here, this one from Andrew. Is it a chemistry issue that Tobias Merriweather and Devin Dampier can't seem to sync up, or something else? And I think boiling it down to just a very simple answer, yes, I think chemistry is the big issue. But a lot of their um, inability to connect has been circumstantial. So obviously, West Virginia, the ball slips out of Dampier's hands. It sucks. It's unfortunate. It got picked off, but the ball slipped out of his hands. That's not chemistry. Merriweather got bumped by a teammate running a route at the top of his route against Texas Tech that Dampier was throwing a corner route. Merriweather got bumped and was unable to get back on track to track that ball down. So again, it sucks. That's not necessarily chemistry. We can talk about it being a timing thing with, I think it was I can't tell you, I can't remember who the other receiver was. It might have been Benny, but bumping into his own receiver, like that's out of their control. That's not necessarily a chemistry issue. There have been some really close misses as well. And I think those are the things where you can point to chemistry being an issue there. So it's been a number of different things. And I think, Merriweather wasn't here for spring ball. He missed out on hundreds of reps to build chemistry with Dampier. And that's not Merriweather's fault. He didn't enter the portal until the spring window, but he didn't get those additional reps in spring ball to build that chemistry. He didn't get here until the summer to start repping it out with Dampier. And I think it's important to not take the chemistry that Ryan Davis and Dampier have for granted. Those two have spent a lot of time together on the field, in the film room. There's just a chemistry there that, won't be matched because of the time that those two have spent together. I think Merriweather, Bentley, Buchanan will definitely build a stronger chemistry as we get deeper into the season. And as they get more reps, you're already seeing that Bentley's got a great rapport and Buchanan has earned the trust of Dampier. And I think for Merriweather, I think just repping it out, getting reps, spending time in the film room, getting on the same page in terms of what they're seeing across from them, with the defense. I think those will be important opportunities for Dampier and Merriweather to spend time together, to get on the same page, to rep it out in practice. And I think that above all else is going to be the key. Obviously, I think Beck and Dampier can do some things to get Merriweather more involved. And I do believe that we'll see some of that moving forward. So, I think boiling it down to what is the biggest issue, I just think it's a lack of time together. And I think that will come together. And it's not just Dampier, it's Beck as well. He's got to have an understanding of where can he trust Merriweather the most to execute with Dampier. So it's all together. They just need more time together. And I think the bye week came at a good time to help them do that, to take those necessary steps to build that chemistry a little bit further. So I think that's the key. So those are the questions that I've got for you. Let's now get to my conversation with Damon Allred of ArizonaSports.com, who provided a lot of really good insights into the Arizona State Sun Devil program. All right, here we go. All right, Damon Allred of Arizona Sports 98.7 joining me now. Damon, man, how are you?
I'm doing good. Always happy to hop on and talk some ball.
Good, man. I appreciate it. Obviously, we know the matchup this weekend, Arizona State coming up to Salt Lake City and Utah. And what are you looking forward to most with this matchup?
I think the biggest thing for me is just seeing how ASU responds to the Rice Eccles environment. I think we saw how they responded with another super hostile environment earlier this season, and it didn't go super well at Mississippi State. Obviously, the cowbells are pretty different from the third down jump and everything you got going on up in Salt Lake City. But I think that they've learned some things from that experience. They definitely responded better in the second half than in the first half once they had kind of internalized that environment. And they definitely performed better on the road when they had to go to Baylor a couple weeks later and kind of won that game in close fashion. And so I think they're definitely in a better spot having made kind of those mistakes on the road, I think, than what they're able to deal with now.
How have you, what's been impressive, with Arizona State's start in conference play, 2-0, earning some, some tough, some gritty wins? Has that been the most impressive part about this whole thing?
Yeah, just the fact that they continue to win close games. I think that the stat now is over the last 18 games, 8 of them have been by 7 points or fewer, and they're 7-1 in those games. So just their ability to come out in these clutch games where obviously you're leaning a lot on Sam Leavitt and Jordan Tyson. Jesus Gomez has been kind of, pardon the pun, but he's kind of been a godsend because of just what ASU went through with the kicking game last year. But
Yeah.
I mean, for him to have the game-winning kicks that he's had, even one of them coming after he was 1 for 3 on the night prior, I think just they've gotten a lot of the things in place to continue with that culture of we win close games because we have the players that can make the plays in those moments.
Well, that's interesting. That was something I wanted to ask you about with Kenny Dillingham taking over. This is now year 3 for him. Obviously, he's done a tremendous job getting to the Big 12 championship, winning that, and getting to the playoff. But what's to me from afar, he's really instilled kind of a winning culture there that's been absent for a really long time. What has that been like to kind of see that instilled in the program there at Arizona State?
Yeah, I think it's hard for me to look other places than just the fact that he instills so much fun in the day-to-day of, college football, which there are so many coaches right now in Power 4 that want to be curmudgeons about just kind of the revenue sharing or the NIL things that have kind of developed in the last few years with college football. But I think Kenny Dillingham has really adapted well to it and embraced it all because I think he's seen that embracing it is better than kind of rubbing up against it. And when it goes up against the grain for your program, it can kind of have a negative effect. But I think you saw just over this last offseason with essentially no one from the 2 deep transferring out. I think from when many people would expect that, some bigger schools could poach some guys just because of the money difference. And, they were able to retain guys very well. And so I think that came as a surprise to many people. But for the people that, see the culture on the day-to-day basis, I don't think it came as a surprise to any of us.
That's an interesting word that you used, fun. And I think that's a point that I've talked about with Utah this year is that it feels fun again. And I think the last few years that has been absent. So it's not something that, should be taken for granted or scoffed at. Like, I do think we need to remember that these are still young adults and guys transitioning from their teens. Fun is still important to them. And I think Kenny Dillingham, again, from afar, just the way he's instilled all of that, right? The positive vibes and the fun nature and all that, I think is noticeable. And it's created that winning culture and buy-in where you guys are now getting into those late fourth quarter situations, crunch time moments, and making plays. So from afar, it's been really interesting to follow that over the last couple of years with Dillingham there. I want to transition to Sam Leavitt. And as he goes into year 2, I did a preseason quarterback ranking in the Big 12, and I had Sam Leavitt number 1. He just following Cam Rising for a couple years. He doesn't have the greatest physical tools. He was a good athlete, but what it was he just had this knack. He understood, how to win. And I think I see some of that in Sam Leavitt. What have you made of Sam Leavitt as he goes into year 2 now at the helm at Arizona State? The good, the bad, all of it.
Yeah, it was interesting because I think that Sam kind of has this reputation now as a little bit of a cockier guy, and some people see him as arrogant. And, it wasn't like that when he was first named the starting quarterback at the end of last fall camp. I mean, they went through fall camp not knowing who the starter was going to be for much of the time. And just when he was named the starter, he's talked about, how he felt the need to prove himself to his teammates more. And, he maybe wasn't playing that free until later on in the season when I think you kind of saw him hit his stride there with the Kansas State game on, kind of just with how he was, propelling them to wins at times. And just coming back into this season, he enters with some of the Heisman expectations. This is another thing that he's talked about with, the expectations kind of weighed on him a little bit, especially after he had the really bad first half at Mississippi State where he was 5 for 15 with 30 passing yards, and that's it. And then they completely pivoted to the run game in the second half. I mean, it was just clearly not a great start to the season for him. But I think the way that his legs have kind of gone all season, even dating back to the NAU game where he had this 50-plus yard run for a touchdown, where, he just puts the defenders on notice for the rest of the season where, hey, this is something that you have to respect with my game. I don't think it was as much last season, especially after he broke his ribs against Utah and kind of trailed off as a runner the rest of the season. But now that he's healthy, he kind of put on some more weight over the offseason and cited staying healthy as a reason for that. I just think he's been much better because of how the out of structure stuff has kind of forced teams to defend the in structure stuff a little bit differently. And he's been performing better in that aspect really since Big 12 play started.
Yeah, it really has been, since that Mississippi State game. And that's interesting. You noted that change. Kyle Whittingham talked about it in his press conference that the thing that stands out to them is when things break down and he gets out of pocket and he breaks off these plays, uses his legs. That's the thing I think that, not that they're most concerned about, because I think Jordan Tyson is a fantastic receiver. Raleek Brown is also a fantastic running back. There's good weapons around Sam Leavitt, but I think that is, when you talk about if Utah can limit, one big thing, I think it would be Leavitt's ability to break the pocket, break contain, and use his legs, because it just does so much to mess with defenses. And so that's really interesting. And
you guys know with Devin Dampier as well, too.
Oh, yeah.
It can really affect defenses.
Yeah, it changes the math in terms of how you got to defend, how you got to account for players. So it does a lot. And, with talking Jordan Tyson, Raleek Brown, I think we have an understanding of, what those players are. Tyson is one of the top receivers in the country. Raleek Brown is explosive. There's a guy returning this week at wide receiver, Jalen Moss. What sort of element is he going to add to this passing attack for the Sun Devils? Because right now, no offense to the receiving core or anything like that, but just based on production, right? It's a lot of Tyson. And then the second option is try to get again to Tyson. What's Moss going to bring?
Yeah, you mentioned it right there. The second and third receiving options have been more running backs and tight ends than they've been wide receivers at this point. I think that's been very different from what we've expected, just from what we saw in fall camp and things like that. Just, you expected a guy like Jalen Moss to have a big impact. Obviously, he goes down with an injury in the first half of the first game, which is unfortunate. And then right as he's about to start coming back from this injury, he comes up with a sickness. And Sam Leavitt mentions there's something to do with his eye. And we never fully get the answer of what was going on with that illness. But he finally ends up coming back to the team right as the bye week comes, fittingly. And so, you've been looking to get this situation rolling, and you can kind of say that about a few other receivers too. We can get into them if you want as well. But, with Jalen Moss, you were expecting a guy who had a really good feel for situational routes, finding the soft spot in zones, things like that. He had produced about 100 catches and 1,000 yards, double-digit touchdowns over the previous 2 seasons at Fresno State, which, we heard a lot about how Marcus Arroyo's offense here at ASU is tied very closely back to the Fresno State offense with Monken and all that. And so, we were expecting kind of them to hit the ground running with Moss. And when it didn't happen, 2 targets, no catches in that first half against NAU, it kind of surprised a lot of us. But what we've seen with players that have been injured this season and then have made a return, they haven't really done a ton in their first game back. It's kind of been a feel your way out type of situation. I'm not sure if that's what it'll be with Moss this week or not. I'll hoping to talk to wide receiver coach Hines Ward a little bit later today and kind of get a better feel for that. But just as far as the impact that he can bring to the offense, knowing that ASU has struggled so much in the red zone, knowing that Jordan Tyson has been such an option there, I think having Moss, who's another guy that can feel out the defense a little bit, could definitely provide some more options there where they've struggled.
And, a key matchup in this game, in my eyes, is going to come down to the trenches on both sides of the ball, right? Obviously, Utah's offensive line, we'll talk about that. But I'm curious about Arizona State's offensive line and the matchup here against Utah. It sounds like there's a little bit of shuffling going on with the Arizona State offensive line. That's usually not something you like to hear 5 games into the season. But What's Dillingham trying to accomplish by shuffling things around up front?
Yeah, so basically what he's talked about recently is he likes to rotate 7 linemen in
Mm,
each per game. He did a good job of that last season. It hasn't happened as much this year. Then you see in the TCU game for the third drive, they bring in Wade Helton at left guard instead of Jamedo Abibo, who had started all 5 games and looked good at times, but I think many people believed he was the weak link on the
mm,
5, Abibo. And so once Helton came in and it was Josh Atkins, Wade Helton, Ben Coleman, Kyle Scott, and Max Yanachor across the line, that group performed really well. Prior to that switch, it was 38 net yards, I believe, on 2 drives
mm,
with 2 punts. And then for the rest of the game, 9 of 10 drives at least got to the TCU 30. And so, it felt like a big change, paid dividends there. The switch happened too when Abibo had a costly holding penalty that negated a
mm.
big play to Jordan Tyson. And so I
Yeah,
think when that happens and you see Sam Leavitt after the play kind of getting on him about it, it kind of felt like the move was coming.
yeah,
Preseason, we had Wade Helton in the picture too, just because he was contending for starting center reps when Ben Coleman was having some snapping issues. He had gone from left guard last season to center for the first time this year in his college career, that Coleman, that is. And there were just some snapping issues. And so they were trying out Wade Helton. He looked pretty good at center. I believe that the best 5 included Helton at center and Coleman at left guard. And so I think that's something you may see. Dillingham talked about that last Monday, just about, we'd like to rotate Helton in more, but center is such a tough spot to do that because you'd like to have consistency, continuity with that center to quarterback exchange. And so it'll be interesting to see. I think I prefer Helton at center and Coleman at left guard, but we just haven't seen that at all yet this season.
yeah.
Coleman has taken all the center snaps except for in blowouts. Helton's gotten a few, but I would prefer to see Helton at center and Coleman at left guard.
Interesting. That is interesting. You mentioned that you agreed that you think this is a battle of the trenches. What stands out to you most about this matchup in the trenches specifically, whether it be, Arizona State's offensive line or defensive line, Utah's, O-line or D-line? What about this matchup in the trenches gets your attention?
Well, I think it's the fact that ASU has been one of the most productive pass rushes in the country. I think
Yeah.
they're 4th in the country in total sacks right now with 19. And, that's been a huge jump up from last year. It definitely wasn't a part of the defense as much. They still had a very effective defense, very effective in the run defense or in the run game, especially. But this year they have the pass rush too. And, Brian Ward the defensive coordinator kind of tried to downplay a little bit the production that they've had, especially I think going up against this Utah offensive line, which, as you've mentioned and as you know, is very, very good.
Mhm.
I think it'll be a good test to see whether this defensive line that's been so productive can hold up against a better competition. They're obviously coming off an incredible game against TCU where they had 6 sacks, more fourth quarter sacks than TCU
Yeah.
had total yards.
Yeah.
And, Prince Dorba had the incredible strip sack to kind of seal the game at the end. And I just think it's going to be a really good test just to see that group in kind of a precarious situation this week.
Yeah, it's been interesting diving into some of the numbers. Arizona State, that defensive line or that defense just with a base rush, just 4 guys, 12 sacks on the year is what they're credited with. And you look at the pressure rate, it's not a defense that gets a lot of pressure consistently, where you see like at Texas Tech or Utah where they've got a high pressure rate and that's led to a good number of sacks. It's been really interesting to see this Arizona State squad have a pressure rate in the Big 12 that lands, I think, in somewhere 8 or 10, somewhere in there in that range, and yet they're at the top of the conference in sack numbers. So in terms of the amount of pressure in general, it's not that great, which is maybe something coach is speaking to there. But you guys are finishing, you guys are getting home, making the plays, and I think that's been really impressive. I shouldn't say you guys, but Arizona State is finishing when they get the opportunities, and I think that says a lot. So we'll finish with this one, Damon, because I'm up against it, and I apologize. I would love to keep chatting, but I got to keep this one pretty quick. But on that defensive side of the ball, who are the must-know players, the guys that genuinely make a difference that maybe don't get the credit that they're due. Just who are the guys that we should be mindful of going into this matchup?
Well, I think cornerback Keith Abney has done an incredible job this season. He's among the guys with the most coverage snaps to not allow a touchdown yet. It seems like every time there's a big play in the passing game, it's going away from Abney and not going at him. He had the first interception by a defensive back this year too for ASU. And, he's just been a lockdown guy this year as a junior that's hoping to kind of make some NFL noise this year. But one guy I really think that I don't think gets enough credit is Jordan Crook, who's one of the leaders of the defense and is just a linebacker who flies around. I think that's going to be so key against kind of the triple option that Utah runs, where, Crook is going to have to make some of the decisions. Keyshawn Elliott, too, the other starting linebacker. These guys are going to have to make some tough decisions at times. And I think that they're just about as well equipped to do it as anybody on the defense.
So looking at this matchup, this will be the last one, I promise. Just looking at the matchup, just what are the keys to this game for Arizona State, and what are you looking forward to most with this matchup here?
I think a lot of it is going to come down to the trenches, and I also think a lot of it is just going to come down to ASU finally getting off to a hot start. And, we've seen them respond from tough starts so many times, but, it feels like maybe in a situation where you're at Rice Eccles, that maybe that's not something you can do the way you weren't able to do it at Mississippi State. And, you've got to start fast, especially I think in the passing game, because you've established enough that the running game is something the teams have to respect. But the passing game in a situation like that, I think is going to be really tough. And with the man coverage that Utah plays so much, and with how sticky they are with receivers, I think it's going to be key for Jordan Tyson to find some separation and kind of make a big play early so that, other options can open up.
Yeah, and just to kind of respond, I think for Utah, it's going to come down to the run game and establishing the run, on those early downs and having success there to get into those third and shorts. Because when Arizona State, that defense, when they get into those 3rd and 6+ yard situations, that's when that pass rush is really shining. And I think that's going to be key for Utah is early down success, establishing the run and allowing that to open up the passing game. So this is going to be a physical matchup. I think Arizona State, again, there's been this kind of growing respect between Utah and Arizona State over the last couple of years. I think that's due in large part to the respect that Kyle Whittingham and Kenny Dillingham have for one another.
The really fast.
Yeah, dude. That's a great name for this. That is fantastic.
I can't take credit for it. I saw it online, man. But yeah,
dude, that's great.
A good name.
We'll have to pump that out. Dude, that's a great one. And so this will be another good test. And I think everybody's kind of hoping to see some Pac-12 after dark, reminiscent magic of the good old days, I guess. But we'll see. Damon, I appreciate chopping on.
Exercising the demons of the 55-3 last time ASU went up there too. Brian Ward mentioned he's not going to have any good feelings when he goes out on that field. So,
well, Utah hopes to keep that, keep that trend going. So, clash of titans here, I guess. But David, where can people find you? Where can they read your stuff and tune into what you're sharing?
Yeah, so I got ASU coverage and movie coverage as well. I also cover movies for our news site over here.
Oh, cool.
On I am Damon Allred on Twitter and Instagram, and then just on ArizonaSports.com, you can find my articles as well.
Damon, appreciate the time, man. We'll see you, man. Okay,
appreciate it.